I've noticed something over the years, and it's bothered me. I've watched people go from making 30,000 a year to making 300,000 a year, and you'd think their money problems would disappear. That's what they thought too. But here's the thing. The problems don't disappear. They just change shape. Sometimes they get worse. That's not what we're told, is it? We're told that if we just earn more, everything will be fine. Get that promotion, get that raise, get that new job, and then you'll be okay. But I've seen enough people over enough decades to know that's not how it works. The amount you earn, that's just one number. And it's not the number that matters most. I remember talking to a young man years ago. He was complaining about money, said he couldn't get ahead. He was making about 40,000 at the time. I ran into him maybe 5 years later. He'd done well. He was making over 100,000. Good for him. But when we talked, he was still complaining about money, still feeling stressed, still feeling behind. And I thought, well, that's interesting. His income more than doubled, but the feeling didn't change. The problem wasn't the income, it was something else. And I've seen this pattern repeat itself hundreds of times with people at every income level. Folks making 50,000 feel broke. Folks making 500,000 feel broke. You'd think that's impossible. How can someone making $500,000 a year feel broke? But they do all the time. And the reason is pretty simple once you see it. They spend what they make or more than they make, always a little bit more than what's coming in. Here's what happens. You get a raise. Let's say you're making 60,000 and you get bumped up to 70,000. That extra 10,000 a year, that's real money. You could save it. You could invest it. You could use it to get ahead. But that's not what most people do. They think, well, now I can afford a nicer apartment or a nicer car or nicer clothes or more vacations. They upgrade their life. And pretty soon that extra 10,000 is gone, spent before it even hits the account. I call this lifestyle inflation. And it's one of the main reasons money problems repeat themselves. Because as your income goes up, your expenses go up to match it, sometimes faster than the income. You think you're getting ahead, but you're just running faster on the same treadmill. The gap between what you earn and what you spend, that gap doesn't really change. Sometimes it gets smaller. Now, why does this happen? It's not because people are stupid. I've seen very intelligent people fall into this trap. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, people who are smart enough to do very complex work, but they still struggle with money because intelligence and financial discipline are not the same thing, not even close. You can be brilliant at your job and terrible with money. I've seen it over and over. Part of it is human nature. We adapt. You know this from your own life. You get something new, something nice, and for a little while it makes you happy. But then you get used to it. It becomes normal. And you start wanting the next thing, the nicer version, the upgrade. This is how we're wired. And it's fine when we're talking about appreciating what we have. But when it comes to spending, this tendency can destroy you financially. I've lived in the same house for a very long time. People find that strange sometimes. They think, well, you could afford any house in the world. Why stay in that one? And the answer is simple. I like my house. It does everything I need it to do. Getting a bigger house wouldn't make me happier. It would just cost more money and create more hassle. But most people don't think that way. They think bigger is better, fancier is better. And so they keep upgrading, keep spending, keep chasing something that never quite satisfies them. Here's another thing I've noticed. Money problems are usually behavior problems. They're not math problems. The math is actually pretty simple. Spend less than you earn. Save the difference. Invest it wisely. Don't take on debt you can't handle. That's it. A child could understand it. But understanding it and doing it are completely different things. Because doing it requires you to control yourself, to resist temptation, to be patient, to go against what everyone around you is doing. And that's hard. I think about the way people spend when they're emotional. This is a big one. You have a bad day. You feel stressed. You feel like you deserve something nice. So you buy something. It makes you feel better for a little while, but the feeling fades. And now you've spent money you didn't need to spend. And next time you feel bad, you do it again. It becomes a pattern, a habit. And those little purchases, they add up more than you realize. Or think about social pressure. Your friends buy a new car. Your neighbor renovates their kitchen. Your coworker is going on an expensive vacation. And you start to feel like you should do those things too. like you're falling behind if you don't. So you spend money to keep up, to maintain appearances, to feel like you're on the same level, but maybe your friends are in debt up to their eyeballs. Maybe they're stressed about money too, but just hiding it. You don't know. You're comparing your real financial situation to their carefully curated image. And that's a losing game. I've never cared much about what other people think of how I live. And I realize that's easier said than done. Social pressure is real. It's powerful, but it's also a trap. Because if you're spending money to impress other people, you're never going to have enough. There's always someone with more, always something nicer, always another level to reach. It's exhausting, and it's a guaranteed way to stay broke, no matter how much you earn. Let me tell you something else. There's a difference between income and wealth, a big difference. And most people confuse the two. Income is what you make. Wealth is what you keep. I've known people with high incomes and no wealth because they spent it all. And I've known people with modest incomes who built real wealth because they saved and invested consistently over time. The person making $200,000 a year who spends $210,000 is in worse shape than the person making $60,000 who spends $50,000. But we don't think about it that way. We just see the big income and assume that person is doing well. This is why raises don't bring peace. You think they will. You think, if I could just make this much more, then I'd be okay. Then I could relax. But you get there and the feeling doesn't come because you've already adjusted your spending to match the new income, or you're already thinking about the next level. The peace doesn't come from the income. It comes from the gap, from spending less than you earn, from having savings, from not living paycheck to paycheck, no matter how big the paycheck is. I've talked to people who make enormous amounts of money. I'm talking multiple six figures, sometimes seven figures a year. And some of them are stressed about money, genuinely stressed. And when you dig into it, you find out they're spending everything. They've got the big house with the big mortgage, the expensive cars with the payments, the private schools, the country club membership, the vacations, and it all adds up to just a little bit more than they make. So they feel trapped. They feel like they can't change anything because they've built a life that requires that level of income just to maintain. That's a scary position to be in. Here's the thing about that. When your expenses equal your income, you have no margin for error, no cushion. If something goes wrong, if you lose your job, if you have a medical emergency, if anything unexpected happens, you're in trouble immediately. And living that way creates anxiety, constant low-level anxiety, even if you're not consciously aware of it. You know deep down that you're one problem away from a crisis. That's not a good way to live. No matter how much you're making, I've always believed in having a margin of safety in everything, but especially with money. You want space between what you earn and what you spend, significant space, because life is unpredictable. Things happen, and if you've got that cushion, you can handle it, you can sleep at night. But if you're spending everything, you're vulnerable. And that vulnerability, that's what creates the stress that higher income was supposed to eliminate. Now, let's talk about fear for a minute, because fear plays a big role in why money problems repeat. People are afraid of not having enough, afraid of being left behind, afraid of what others will think, and fear makes you do irrational things. It makes you spend money to feel secure, to feel successful, to feel like you're okay. But spending money doesn't actually make you secure. Saving money makes you secure. Building wealth makes you secure. But that's slower. That's less visible. That doesn't give you the immediate feeling you're looking for. I've seen people make financial decisions out of fear their whole lives, and they wonder why they never get ahead. It's because they're reacting emotionally instead of thinking clearly. They're spending to soothe anxiety instead of addressing the root cause of the anxiety. And the root cause is usually that they don't have enough saved. They're too dependent on their next paycheck. They haven't built any real security. But instead of fixing that, they spend more, which makes the problem worse. It's a cycle, a trap. Another thing I've observed, people think short term. They think about today, this week, this month. They don't think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And that's understandable in a way. The future is abstract. It's hard to imagine. But today is real. Today you want something. Today you can have it, so you get it. And you worry about the future later, except later comes, it always does. And then you wish you'd made different choices. I've spent my whole life thinking long term, decades ahead, and that's changed everything. Because when you think long term, you make different decisions, you prioritize differently. A purchase that seems reasonable, today might look foolish when you think about where you want to be in 10 years. A savings rate that seems painful today might look like the smartest thing you ever did when you look back 20 years later. But you have to have that long-term perspective. And most people don't. They're just trying to get through this month. Here's what's sad about it. The patterns that create money problems early in life, they follow you unless you consciously change them. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, making $30,000 a year, and you don't change your habits, you'll be living paycheck to paycheck when you make $300,000 a year. The numbers change, but the pattern stays the same because it's not about the numbers. It's about the behavior, the choices, the priorities. And those don't change automatically just because you earn more. I think about debt too, the way people use debt. And I'm not talking about a reasonable mortgage on a house you can afford. I'm talking about consumer debt. Credit cards, car loans for cars you don't need, personal loans for lifestyle expenses. This is another way money problems repeat because once you're in debt, you're paying interest. You're working to pay for the past instead of building for the future. And it's hard to get out. Every month, a chunk of your income goes to debt payments. So you feel broke even though you're making decent money because the money's already spoken for before you even see it. And the thing about debt is it often comes from the same underlying issues: impatience, wanting things now instead of waiting, not being willing to live below your means for a while to save up, comparing yourself to others who have things you want. All the same behavioral issues that create money problems in the first place, so you can pay off the debt. And if you don't fix the behavior, you'll just end up in debt again. I've seen this happen countless times. You know what else I've noticed? People don't track their spending. They have a vague sense of where their money goes, but they don't really know. And if you don't know where it's going, you can't control it. You can't make good decisions. You're just guessing. And usually when people actually sit down and track every dollar for a month, they're shocked. They had no idea they were spending that much on eating out, or on subscriptions they forgot about, or on little purchases that seemed insignificant in the moment but add up to serious money. This isn't complicated stuff, but it requires honesty. It requires you to look at your own behavior clearly, and that's uncomfortable. Most people would rather not know. They'd rather just hope it works out somehow. But hope is not a strategy, and avoiding the truth doesn't change the truth. It just means you can't fix the problem. I'll tell you another observation. The people who do well with money long term, they're not necessarily the highest earners. They're the ones who figured out how to live on less than they make, who internalized that, who made it a way of life, not as a temporary sacrifice, but as a permanent approach. And once you do that, once you genuinely live below your means, everything changes. You have options, you have security, you have peace. The money problems that plague most people just don't apply to you anymore. But getting there requires you to reject a lot of what society tells you. Society says you should maximize your lifestyle. Get the nicest things you can afford. You earned it. You deserve it. Treat yourself. All these messages constantly. And if you buy into that, if you live that way, you'll stay on the treadmill forever, no matter how fast you run, no matter how much you earn. The problems repeat because the underlying approach hasn't changed. I've lived simply for a long time, not because I have to, because I want to, because it makes life easier, less complicated, more focused on what actually matters. And I realize not everyone wants to live the way I do. That's fine. But somewhere between living like a monk and spending every dollar you make, there's a balance. And most people are way too far toward the spending side. They could cut back significantly and not actually lose anything that matters, but they don't because it's hard, because it goes against the grain, because everyone else is doing something different. Think about this for a moment. Every money problem you have, there's probably a behavioral root to it. If you're spending too much, that's a behavior. If you're not saving, that's a behavior. If you're making impulsive purchases, that's a behavior. If you're taking on debt you shouldn't, that's a behavior. And behaviors can be changed, but only if you acknowledge them first. Only if you're honest about what you're actually doing and why. The reason money problems repeat is because the behaviors repeat. You can change your income, you can change your job, you can change your location, But if you don't change yourself, if you don't change how you think about money and how you behave with money, the problems come with you. They might look a little different, but they're the same problems, just dressed up in nicer clothes. I've been fortunate in my life, I know that, but I've also been disciplined. I've lived below my means for decades. I've avoided debt. I've saved and invested consistently. I've resisted the temptation to inflate my lifestyle every time things went well. And these choices, these behaviors, they matter more than the opportunities I had, because I've seen people with better opportunities waste them. And I've seen people with fewer opportunities build something real. The difference was behavior, always behavior. So if you're struggling with money, if the problems keep repeating no matter what you do, I'd suggest you look at your behavior, really look at it. Not what you wish you were doing, not what you tell yourself you're doing, what you're actually doing, where the money actually goes, why you make the choices you make, and be honest about it. That's the first step, maybe the most important step. Because here's the truth, you probably earn enough. Most people do, not everyone, but most people. The problem isn't the amount coming in, it's the amount going out. It's the lifestyle you built, the expectations you have, the habits you form. And all of that, that's within your control. It might not feel like it, but it is. Change is hard, especially when it comes to money, because money is tied up with so many emotions, security, status, identity, success, all of it. So changing how you handle money means confronting all of that. And that's uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. If you want different results, you have to do things differently. There's no way around it. I'll leave you with this thought. 10 years from now, you'll be somewhere financially, either in a better place or the same place or maybe a worse place. And where you end up, that's going to be the result of the choices you make starting today. Not your income, your choices, your behavior, your discipline. Whether you can live below your means, whether you can be patient, whether you can resist the constant pressure to spend and consume and upgrade. That's what determines your financial future, not how much you earn, how you behave with what you earn. Think about that. Really think about it, because this is the uncomfortable truth that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. But avoiding it doesn't change it. It just means the problems keep repeating year after year, raise after raise, job after job, the same problems. Because the behavior never changed, it's something to consider